Supersaws are probably one of the hardest things to get to sound fucking awesome. And it's because there's so many different layers and processes that you kind of have to go through, and you have to get it pretty good in order to get the Supersaw to sound professional and full and nice and clean. So in this video, I'm going to show you some simple steps that you can do at home using any synth and basically just presets to get that full Supersaw sound. Alright, let's dive in and have a look. Alright, so as you can see here, I've just got a simple chord progression that I made in another video, which you can check out in the description below. I'm going to leave a whole bunch of links and stuff in the description below so you can check out my other stuff. And this is actually a square, so each waveform shape has a slightly different characteristic, and that characteristic can be, you can use those characteristics to change the sounds of your Supersaws. So this is just basically a square with a filter, and I've actually got the filter moving a little bit. And I guess this tip is to make sure you have a good chord progression that is built to support a Supersaw. Now, Supersaws like to have notes spread across many octaves. So you can see this one's 1, 2, 3, 4. This looks like it's 4 octaves, and it could even be 5 if I have a top one up here. So tip number 1 is make sure your notes or your chord progressions are spread across many octaves, and that really helps spread out your Supersaw over the whole audio spectrum. So next up we have adding extra layers to our Supersaw. So this was our main Supersaw, and I just duplicated it 5 times, well 7 times really, and then I changed the color of these 2 here, and I put it in a bass group, and I put these other 5 in a Supersaw group because we're going to add some effects to these groups later. But if I had to choose 2 or 3 layers out of these whole groups that are the most important things, the most important sounds that you should have in every single Supersaw, it'd be the main Supersaw, obviously, white noise, and a sub bass. Now, let's have a listen to those individually. So as you can hear, this occupies the low frequencies, this occupies the middle frequency, and then this occupies the high frequencies. Now, we use these other sounds to fill in the gaps in between those main aspects. So these are the main things that people will hear, and then these things are the backing things. So I like to use another higher Supersaw with a different tone from the main Supersaw. I'll also like to use a piano in my Supersaws as well. And then a backing Supersaw, which helps, just kind of sits in the background and fills out the sound a little bit. And then this is another important one, the mid bass. And this mid bass is to really help beef up the sub bass. Now, as you can see in this mid bass, I have removed some of the notes, because if I have them all playing at once, it starts getting a little bit rumbly in the low end and distorted, and I don't want that. So in order to fix that problem is you go through and you remove some of the notes that are causing you problems. Alright, so now it's time to start mixing some of these sounds together. So basically highlight all of these, turn them all down, same here, turn them all down. I just want to turn my Supersaw on, back up to 0, and now I'm going to start mixing in my other sounds into this Supersaw. Let me mute the drums. Start with the sub bass and the white noise, and then we can mix in these other ones. Now this is just a rough mix. This is just to help us get a rough idea of what it's actually going to sound like. A Supersaw is only as good as its build, really. Even if you make this whole Supersaw awesome, if the build's shit, the Supersaw is going to sound shit. So the build's so important. It like introduces the awesomeness of your Supersaw. So if you want to learn how to make awesome builds to help emphasize your awesome Supersaw, watch the video up here and I'll show you how to do that. Now you've kind of got like all of these things that are a little bit more panned out. It's time to start coming in and adding some EQ into them and removing all of the frequencies that you don't want. So I don't want these low frequencies in that white noise because that is a very high frequency, high pitch noise. The high Supersaw is right there. You can see I've got a lot of the low frequencies cut off and some of the high frequencies that are occupied by this white noise. I don't want any of the other stuff. And now the piano, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to roll off all the low end here, at least up to 100 hertz. Still sounds good. The backing Supersaw, I'm going to roll off this all up to 100 as well. There's probably some sounds in here that I don't like. The main Supersaw, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to roll off these lows because I don't want anything clashing with my mid and sub bass. Alright, so now that we've got all the levels right, we can start adding some effects to these different layers to make individual ones stand out and shine. So one of the most awesome effects that I like to use is an OTT, and you can see it here. Now that is just in multi-band dynamics, and then OTT, drag it straight on, like so. Now let's listen to this before and after. You can hear it really makes it shine and stand out and makes it a lot sharper. So I'm going to go through, well, as you can see, I've already got an OTT on here, which is actually an X for OTT. I'll leave links for these downloads in the description below. It's all free, this one here. I'm going to go through some of these other things and maybe add a bit of OTT and see how they sound. I've actually got a full video and a full tutorial on how to use OTT because it's so powerful. You can check that out. It's up in the description somewhere, or up in the link up here somewhere. Another sweet thing you can do is adding width to these sounds. Now, a rule of thumb, not a guideline, sorry, not a rule, but more like a guideline, is to make the high frequency noises more wide than the lower frequency noises. So on the white noise, I'm going to drag a filter delay. Drag it right on there. And what this does is, if you copy these settings, because I've set this up so it makes my sound a lot wider. So basically, I think the original's like this, and it's like they're all on sync like that. So all you do is you turn off all of your filters and you just want to leave your left and right channels activated. You want to turn these to time, and then you want to put 1 to 1 millisecond, 1 to 10 milliseconds. And what this does is it tricks the ear into thinking that there's two separate sounds playing in your ears, when really it's the same sound, just slightly delayed. So let's listen to this before. Now after. So you can hear it spreads it out a little bit. So I'm going to copy this. I'm going to put this on, I actually think I have one on here. This is another awesome one by Ozone Imager 2. It's actual stereo, like examiner, whatever they call it, an imager. So that one's already on there. The piano, I might add this to the piano. One thing this does is it turns the volume up, so you'll have to go along and turn the volume down a little bit. So another sweet thing that's really going to help your Supersaw bounce is by adding some sidechain to these groups. And that's why I did these two groups. I did the synth group and the bass group. And that's so we can add separate processing to each group. And that's very important. You want to process your basses differently to your Supersaw. So let's go ahead. Let's grab a compressor, drag it on here. Forget about this effect I've got on. That's for the next thing. and I'm going to pump up the ratio, which means less sound is going to be heard when the compression kicks in. And I'm going to drag this down quite a long way, and then I'm going to turn sidechain on, and I'm going to get my kick. You can hear that bouncing now with the kick and the snare. So I'm going to copy these two compressors, and I'm going to bring them onto my bass track. Bass group, sorry. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to change the attack a little bit, because I want a slightly different sidechain for my basses. Maybe even get the Supersaw. I might raise these up a little bit, make it a little bit more emphasized. Let's listen to this all together now. Okay, so now you've got all that sidechain. It's got a nice pumping motion to it. I want to add another really cool effect, which is helps kind of open up the Supersaw. Now you can do that with this thing, auto filter. So I've got it turned off for now, and I've actually got one here. And if I click A to open up automation, click on this knob here, you can see I've already got it automated, and maximize it. You can see I've got a filter, low pass or a high cut filter, opening up in certain parts of the song. So let's see this in action. So I'm going to copy this exact same filter. I'm going to put this down onto the bass track here. Alright, so compression is how you can really get that beefed up Supersaw sound. Now it's really hard to go overboard with compression, and I'm guilty of it, but this is how powerful it can be. So we made these two groups here with all of our basses and our higher synths in there, and that's so we can process them differently. So grab a compressor, drag it onto this Supersaw group, and we're going to listen to this while we're messing with some settings. So let's listen here. You can hear how it's like with the side chaining and with the filtering, the volume goes up and down quite a lot. Now I don't want that. I want it to be more, I want it to be less, have less dynamic range. So with our compressor, we can lower the threshold and adjust our ratio to remove that dynamic range. So as you can see, there is a lot of gain reduction there, but it really helps to flatten out the movement in the Supersaw. So you know what? I'm just going to copy this across, paste it on the bass group, see how that sounds. Alright, now you've added all your effects and stuff, you might have added some reverb and things like that. Now, one of the best ways to really make your Supersaws snap with your snare, wow, that was a tongue twister, is to remove where the snare hits. And as you can see, I've done it, but I've got a reverb tail that comes across here. So let's listen to the reverb tail in here. So there's a reverb tail in here that I want to get rid of. So a good way to do this is to create a new audio track in here, make it a bit bigger, and click this drop down box here and click resampling. Now what this does is if I arm this track, it's going to resample whatever's played. So click at the start, solo this and this because I only want to resample these two groups, and then I click record. So as you can see, I've got that thing resampled now. I'm just going to solo this one now. And now what I can do is I can come in here and I can delete my reverb tails. And then once you have this audio track here with all of with your bounced audio in it, you can come through and you can start compressing it, you can start EQing it and just messing around with it. Let's see how that sounds. You can even throw an EQ8 on there and put it into mono stereo. Now I'm on mono, so I don't want to have too much rolled off the mid, but what I do want to do is cut out some of these highs a little bit in the mono, and then not too much though. And then when I click the side, I want to roll off all of these side frequencies on the sides, all of these sub frequencies on the sides, and I want to boost some of these side high frequencies on the sides to add that, emphasize that stereo width. Now this is really going to shine once you have a lead and some effects and you've got that build leading up into it. So this is what it sounds like with all of that stuff. Alright, so these tips, they all work the best when you use all of them combined. You can use one by itself if you want, that's fine, but I find they work the best with all combined. So I hope some of this stuff has helped you improve your Supersaws, and yeah, thanks for watching.
Tell me that I seem just fine. Sipping on the sunrise. Now I'll show you. Tell you a little about myself.